The story of Yusuf Joseph, known in Islam as Hazrat Yusuf A.S., begins not with a palace or grandeur. It begins inside a family, a home filled with love yet complicated by human emotion. Yusuf was deeply loved by his father, and that love was clear for everyone to see. His brothers, however, noticed it too. At first, it was only small feelings of jealousy, but over time, jealousy grew heavier. It became fear. Fear that Yusuf might rise above them. Fear that he might take a place in their father's heart that they thought was theirs. And when fear grows without being spoken, it transforms into strategy. When Yusuf shared his dreams that hinted at greatness, it was not the dreams themselves that scared his brothers. It was the meaning behind them. The idea that someone so young could have a future that might overshadow them. They did not see innocence. They saw threat. And when they saw that threat, they decided to act. Not suddenly, not violently, quietly, carefully. They chose to remove him from their lives. Yusuf was taken to a well. He was left alone in darkness, wondering if anyone would come for him. To anyone else, this might seem like cruelty. But in that era, disappearance was often safer than death. A missing boy eventually fades from memory. A dead boy creates questions, guilt, and witnesses. They did not want questions. They wanted distance. And yet the currents of history do not stop for cruelty. A caravan passed by. Yusuf was discovered and pulled from the well. He was alive, but he was no longer a son. He was no longer a boy with a home. He became a commodity, an object to be sold, a life that belonged now to a system much larger than himself. He was taken to Egypt, and Egypt was not a simple land. It was a complex civilization. It had administration, structure, law, taxation, grain storage, and carefully maintained records. Its power was not chaotic, it was deliberate. And Yusuf, a boy from a distant land, entered it as a slave. In that historical context, slavery was not only physical labor, it was a total loss of identity. A slave had no lineage, no protection, no public voice. He belonged to the system before he belonged to himself. Yusuf was bought by a high-ranking Egyptian official, a man deeply connected to the state. Such households were not ordinary. They were small centers of power, places where discipline was taught, where management was observed, and where political awareness was learned quietly day by day. Inside this household, Yusuf grew up watching. He noticed the flow of authority. He saw how decisions were made and enforced. He saw how resources were carefully controlled. He observed how silence could be a tool for control, and how responsibility, when properly given, maintained order. While history rarely records the quiet growth of character, those around him noticed. Yusuf had a calm, steady intelligence. He did not complain, he did not rebel, but he was reliable. Gradually, his responsibilities within the household grew, and with that, he began to understand human behavior in ways few young men could. But stability is fragile. Life in systems of power is never safe. The wife of his master tried to seduce him. Yusuf refused, and that refusal made him dangerous in her eyes. In hierarchical societies, rejecting someone with power can be seen as rebellion. And rebellion in those times demanded punishment, so a false story was told. His reputation was attacked, and he was imprisoned. This was not a punishment for wrongdoing, it was containment, a method to remove embarrassment. Prisons in Egypt were instruments of convenience, not justice. Yusuf entered with no protection, no advocate, no social standing. He was alone, invisible, and yet, remarkably, he did not lose his strength of character. He became steady even in uncertainty. Other prisoners noticed. They saw his calm, his fairness, his wisdom. Slowly, he became a figure of respect inside a place meant to erase people. Among these prisoners were two men tied to the royal court, both troubled by dreams they could not understand. Yusuf, guided by divine insight, interpreted them. One would be restored to position, the other would meet death. The outcomes unfolded exactly as he predicted. Before leaving prison, the freedman carried a message: remember Yusuf, to the king. Yusuf did not plead. He did not cry. He understood how systems work. Survival alone does not open doors. Relevance does. And yet, as often happens, memory is fragile. Months passed. Yusuf remained unseen, observing the world quietly, learning patience, and preparing for the moment opportunity would finally arrive. During these years, he observed more than ever. He noticed human fear, ambition, greed, and hope. He saw the cracks in systems and the strength of careful planning, and inside the quiet of prison walls, he understood how power works. Not through brute force, but through order, preparation, and insight. He learned to see people, not as enemies or friends, but as instruments of their own choices. And this knowledge, gained in silence, would prepare him for the moment when he would no longer be invisible. Egypt, at that time, faced a challenge that would change everything. The king had a dream he could not interpret. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin cows. 7 full ears of grain consumed by 7 thin ears. No advisor, no priest, no official could provide an answer. And suddenly, in the memory of one man, Yusuf was recalled. He was summoned before the king, not free yet, not fully recognized, but summoned. And in that moment, Yusuf's preparation, patience, and insight came to fruition. He interpreted the king's dream with precision. He proposed solutions, not just explanations. He suggested administration, storage, planning, and preparation for famine. The king, recognizing his intelligence, began to trust him, and in a remarkable move of governance, gave him authority over the kingdom's resources. From a boy abandoned in a well to a man given the responsibility to preserve a nation, Yusuf's life demonstrates patience, wisdom, and ethical leadership. But his story does not end there. His family, his past, and his personal life still awaited resolution, and the true test of his character, compassion, and judgment was about to begin. When Yusuf was given authority over Egypt's resources, it was not just a rise to power. It was the culmination of years of patience, observation, and careful growth. From the walls of a prison to the highest offices of a kingdom, he had learned how human systems work, how power can be abused, and how preparation can prevent disaster. He was no longer a boy sold into slavery. He was a leader entrusted with the survival of millions. The years of abundance came first. The land produced grain beyond expectation. Storage houses were filled, distribution systems organized, and officials trained to manage resources efficiently. Every decision Yusuf made reflected a deep understanding of human behavior and the practical realities of governance. He knew that famine would come and that panic could destroy even the most organized society. Every action was deliberate, every system tested, every plan prepared. Egypt was ready, not because the famine was avoidable, but because preparation had created stability before crisis struck. And then the famine arrived. It did not come softly. It was severe, unrelenting, touching every corner of the region. Neighboring lands suffered. People traveled long distances in search of food. Egypt, however, remained stable. Grain was distributed, records maintained, and the hungry fed. Yusuf had become not only a guardian of resources but a stabilizer of society. He demonstrated leadership that was rare in history, a combination of compassion, intelligence, and strategy. And yet, amidst all this success, his past was still unresolved. The family he had lost, the childhood stolen from him, had not yet returned to complete his story. One day, among the crowds seeking food, Yusuf's brothers appeared. They did not recognize him. Time had changed his appearance. His status had transformed him. His clothing, his posture, the authority in his voice, all concealed the boy they had once envied. And Yusuf saw them instantly. He knew them. Every expression, every hesitation, every fear, they were familiar. But he did not reveal himself, not yet. He observed. He wanted to see what had changed. What kind of men they had become. Would they recognize their past mistakes? Would they show responsibility, empathy, or remain as they had been? He set a test, small, subtle challenges that required honesty, cooperation, and selflessness. His youngest brother, Benjamin, was brought forward as part of this plan. The brothers reacted with fear, believing history was repeating itself. But as they confronted these new challenges, Yusuf observed how they supported one another, how they expressed care, and how they took responsibility. This was the moment he had waited for, the proof that the family had grown, that they could be trusted, that the past would not define the present. And then the moment of revelation came. Yusuf finally revealed his identity. The words, "I am Yusuf," echoed through the hall, but there was no anger, no accusation. There was recognition, understanding, and reconciliation. The brothers were overwhelmed with shame and relief. They fell silent, struck by the realization of what they had done and what had been done for them. Yusuf spoke not of revenge but of divine wisdom. What they had intended for harm, God had transformed into preservation. Not only for him, but for all of them, and for the people of Egypt who depended on his planning and foresight. He invited his family to Egypt, restoring them to safety, dignity, and honor. His father, Jacob, was reunited with his son after years of separation. The homecoming was emotional, yet Yusuf's composure remained. The boy who had been abandoned in a well had become a man capable of forgiveness, leadership, and ethical judgment. His story demonstrates that true greatness is not about revenge or punishment, but about wisdom, patience, and the courage to act justly even when one holds absolute power. In Egypt, Yusuf continued his governance. He managed the storage and distribution of grain, ensuring fairness and preventing collapse. He worked with officials and citizens alike, emphasizing accountability, planning, and trust. He remained humble despite his power, acknowledging that his abilities were guided by God and not solely by his own intelligence. This combination of practical skill and moral integrity allowed him to stabilize not only the economy, but also the society, leaving a legacy of governance that survived far beyond his own lifetime. The story of Hazrat Yusuf is also a story of human psychology. It shows how envy, insecurity, and fear can lead to harm, but also how patience, insight, and moral courage can transform circumstances. His brothers had acted out of fear, yet that same event set the stage for growth and reconciliation. His personal suffering was immense, but he channeled it into wisdom and leadership. Yusuf's ability to forgive those who wronged him, to plan for the long-term good of society, and to maintain integrity under pressure remains a model for leaders, scholars, and ordinary people alike. The lessons from Yusuf's life extend beyond spirituality. They apply to social systems, leadership, human behavior, and crisis management. A single individual, placed in extreme circumstances, can influence the fate of millions when guided by patience, knowledge, and ethical principles. His life reminds us that challenges, whether betrayal, injustice, or hardship, can be transformed into opportunities for growth, leadership, and service when met with wisdom and restraint. Finally, Yusuf's reunion with his family was not only emotional but historically significant. It symbolized the restoration of order and trust, both within his family and within the society he now helped govern. The reconciliation was complete. Past injustices were addressed not through retaliation, but through insight and moral authority. And in doing so, Yusuf exemplified the highest form of leadership, guiding people not through fear, but through wisdom, fairness, and foresight. Hazrat Yusuf's story ends with stability, forgiveness, and achievement. From a boy betrayed and abandoned to a man trusted with an entire nation's survival, his journey illustrates the extraordinary potential of patience, morality, and strategic insight. He did not allow suffering to harden his heart. He did not allow power to corrupt him. Instead, he used every experience, every challenge, and every loss to cultivate wisdom, resilience, and ethical leadership. It is a story that remains timeless, teaching us how to face adversity, manage responsibility, and act with integrity, even when the world has tested us in every possible way.